Guys, how's it going? My name is Jal, and we actually got some class tuning for the Season 3 content in the War Within. As we're moving into the patch 11.2.5, the season isn't quite done yet, and Blizzard is actually making some changes to try to adjust and tune up the meta, while also doing some fixes for certain bugs and classes that were not functioning properly. We're seeing adjustments for both PvE content as well as in PvP as well, so I'll make sure to delineate which changes are for dungeons and raids, and which ones are for battlegrounds and arenas. And I wanted to go over all of these changes, what they mean for our classes going forward, just how much of an impact they're going to have in the overall meta. And because there's a lot of class changes, I did add chapter marks down below so you could just skip around to the most relevant sections to see what classes get buffed and nerfed out of all your playable options. As always, if you guys want to keep up with regular updates for War Within, be sure to follow the channel and subscribe for patch notes such as these. But otherwise, let's dive right in. I'm going to do this video in an alphabetical order, starting with the class of Death Knight, and off the bat, the popular Frost Death Knights are receiving a bit of a nerf all across the board, at least for PvE content. Frost is arguably the most popular melee class in Mythic Plus, and actually very popular in raids as well. It is a very strong melee option that's far above some of the other playstyles, and they're actually receiving a 3% damage nerf. Not the end of the world, but they are toning that damage down a little bit. This does give other melee classes a little bit more playability against Frost Death Knight. It doesn't completely dethrone Frost, but it does close the gap just a little bit between Frost Death Knights and every other melee. Then we have the Spectral Blood Death Knight, where apparently 11.2 Deathbringer class bonus for Empower Rune Weapon is now 33% effective in PvP, which I've actually been kind of puzzled at this change, because I'm pretty sure Empower Rune Weapon is a Frost Death Knight ability, but they're applied it for Frost or something along those lines. I'm not exactly sure, but apparently Empower Rune Weapon is getting nerfed as the Deathbringer for Blood or Frost. I really cannot tell. I've been staring at this tooltip for a while and I have no idea. So they did end up hitting Blood Death Knights in PvP specifically, where cooldown reduction from Insatiable Blade is now 60% less effective in PvP. It's only now going to be 40% effective of original value, so less cooldown reduction for Blood Death Knights to dip into for PvP content specifically. Then we have the Restoration Druid, where they actually saw a couple of buffs. I'm hitting literally every wrong keybind. Reactive Resin is getting buffed up by 80% when Restoration's healing over time effects are removed by enemies. So with abilities like Purge Magic or Purge as a Shaman, they are replaced with Reactive Resin, which will heal allies for what doesn't seem like a great heal over 6 seconds. Multiple stacks may overlap. They're buffing this by 80%, so hopefully Reactive Resin will be a little bit better. They're also doing some shenanigans with the older tier set, however, where the old tier set from the 11.1 update, so Undermine Raid, the 4 set bonus where Live Bloom has a 30% chance to apply insurance to the target. When insurance is consumed or removed, it leaves a missing rejuve, regrowth, or wild growth on the target. It's an older set. Apparently that bonus benefited from Soul of the Forest for some reason. Soul of the Forest is a good talent where Swiftmend increases the healing of your regrowth and rejuve by 150%, or your next wild growth by 50. So they were just automatically benefiting from it, from Soul of the Forest specifically, which made older tier set actually kind of good for PvP. They also made a change where Overgrowth, when that would be initially cast, it applies Life Bloom, Rejuve, Wild Growth, and Regrowth to the target. However, if you already had an NS running, NS would boost the healing of your Regrowth by 200%. So if you pop an S and then you use Overgrowth, that Regrowth would have that initial burst healing specifically, where it's actually just supposed to apply the healing over time effect instead. So quite a bit of burst healing and some gear healing is being taken out of the Restoration Druid kit, for PvP only specifically. From there we move on to the class of Hunter, and it looks like this class in particular, as either Beastmastery or Marksmanship, have gotten a little bit too far ahead of other range classes in terms of raw popularity. Hunters are pretty much everywhere, whether you look at the dungeons, raids, or PvP, and I think they're just trying to do a bit of nerfs for them in order to bring him more in line with other range DPS instead of letting him run way ahead of everybody else. So starting with Beast Mastery, we're receiving some nerfs like Dark Range of Black Arrow as well as the AoE counterpart of Blake Arrow, both receiving an 8% nerf, though only for dungeons and raids, not for PvP. But for PvP, if you are playing the pack leader playstyle specifically, The damage from Ravenous Leap from Hunt Master's Call is being reduced by 30% for PvP content. As marksmanship, we're also seeing some nerfs as well. Dark Ranger marksmanship also being reduced a little bit, where Black Arrow damage is being reduced by 6% instead of 8%, though that applies for both Black Arrow as well as the Bleak Powder damage. Though for PvP, their damage is something that's inescapable as Dark Ranger or the Sentinel playstyle, as Rapid Fire receives a 10% damage nerf, Aim Shot receives a 10% damage nerf, and Black Arrow specifically of the Dark Ranger receives a 15% damage nerf, which will make marksmanship a little bit less one-shotty and bursty within PvP scenarios. Another spec that's really popular for dungeons and even raid content is Arcane Mage, and they're actually nerfing Arcane Mages by 3%, though this is mostly a PvE set of changes, not a PvP one specifically. Though when it comes to PvP, the talents of Late Drinker has gotten nerfed this time around, where Late Drinker will now repeat its damage at a 35% effectiveness for PvP instead of at 70% effectiveness. And we saw Late Drinker rise to prominence mostly because it is a little bit easier to use whenever you use the ability to Touch the Magi, and with them getting a new version of Touch the Magi being Nether Flux, you're able to get quite a lot of value from Late Drinker, which will basically mimic whatever your ability you use at a reduced value. So if you hit an enemy with a really hard ability like Barrage as like super amped up version with all the different buff components, then Late Drinker would just be amplifying it and copying it to cleave to our nearby targets, but also to do even more burst damage. So that's actually going to be quite a decent bit of burst knocked out for Arcane for PvP. From there we have the class of Monk, and it looks like Mistweavers are actually receiving some nice PvP buffs specifically. Nothing super crazy, but basic abilities such as Soothing Mist are being buffed up by 15% in PvP. This actually can be kind of not great by itself. However, Soothing Mist has a number of different talents that can be further used to amplify its overall value. I was pretty sure that was actually missing a couple of these talents, but yeah, there are some nice synergies for Soothing Mist specifically, especially with its cleave capabilities and such. So there's actually a number of abilities that can be used in order to amplify its effectiveness quite a decent bit. The other ability that's buffed up is Enveloping Mist, which is kind of like your core ability that you'll apply immediately as soon as you need that immediate healing, both for its healing amp, but also for the actual healing over time effect. So both of those are being buffed up by 15% for PvP. The next class that's being buffed up is the Priest, where they primarily are trying to buff the Atonement healing of Disc Priest for raid content, buffing it by 15%. But Atonement normally has a huge healing increase within smaller group sizes, so that's also being adjusted. While Atonement healing is being buffed up by 15%, the actual Atonement healing for groups, like parties and outside of raid content, that's going from 100% amp to a 75% instead. So a slight adjustment for Atonement specifically. The next class on the chopping block is the Retribution Paladin, specifically when it comes to PvP content. It is no surprise that Paladins are kind of everywhere in PvP, especially when they combine together with the Herald of the Sun and that Dawnlight damage. So apparently Dawnlight is receiving a bunch of nerfs. First of all, Dawnlight damage itself is nerfed by 15% within PvP, as well as the cleave damage of Sun's avatar. Whenever you pop your wings, you can basically apply Dawnlight while also link to targets with Dawnlight doing additional damage. Yeah, that's also being nerfed by 15% within PvP as well. The ability of Lay on Hands actually has some baked-in cooldown reduction thanks to the talent of Healing Hands, which allows the cooldown reduction of Lay on Hands to be reduced by up to 60% based on a target's missing health. So if you use it at very, very low health targets, you essentially could have it back up so much quicker. They are limiting this reduction down to 30% max instead of 60% for PvP content. So red pallies are looking, and I guess old pallies in a sense, are looking to use Healing Hands a little bit less regularly. They also fixed an issue where apparently their tier set for 11.2, the actual bonuses were not being reduced by 33%. So you are going to be seeing quite a decent bit of that tier set damage reduction for Retribution Paladins together with Herald of the Sun changes going forward. The next pack is going to be Enhancement Shaman specifically, and for Enhancement what they were doing is actually buffing up the damage of Storm Strike by 45% for PvP. This, however, does not apply for Windstrike and Ascendance, but should give Enhancement quite a bit of an oomph when it comes to one of the basic combat abilities in general. They also amp it up lightning bolt damage by 20% as well, so maybe that should hopefully potentially encourage some enhancement shamans to come out of the woodwork and start joining in for PvP. I've always felt like enhancement shaman issue has always been survivability more than anything, but maybe just the raw overpowering damage of storm strikes and lightning bolts might be enough to see more of them in the future. And finally, we have the class of Rogue. For both Outlaw and Assassination, the Fate-bound coin mechanic was not working as intended. The easiest way to describe the whole Fate-bound mechanic is every time you spend 5 comp points into a finisher, bare minimum, you flip a coin, either you get a buff of Tails, which is just a bunch of cosmic damage and it's very, very strong, or Heads, which is supposed to be a damage increase of at least 10%. The problem is that 10% damage increase on the Heads buff was not working like intended, and for some reason it was just giving you 8% less damage increase. So you're only getting like 2%. And with every single coin flip, it's supposed to, you know, stack up by 2% to 4% to 6%, added into that plus 8%, but 8% was just missing. And this has been a thing since the start of Season 3. So Rogues is Fate-bound, which is Assassination rating profile, and Outlaw rating PvP profile. I guess both Assassin and Outlaw rating and PvP profiles, both were missing a significant amount of raw damage, which is now finally making a return. This should hopefully give Rogues quite a solid bit of raw damage that they just weren't seen since the beginning of the season. So if your Rogues for some reason are hitting a little bit harder, this should be quite a substantial change going forward. But with that, as always, I do want to thank all of you guys so much for watching this update, and I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you did enjoy it or found it informative, go ahead and give it a like, as I would very, very much appreciate it. Also, be sure to join our Discord community just to keep up with any of the new updates regarding content such as Midnight Alpha, Legion Remix, as well as patch 11.2.5. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, I'll see all of you guys in the next one.